Now I want to tell you a day in Auschwitz. Up in the morning, 6 o'clock. In every block you had a person which he was in charge, a ruthless guy. In the morning he walked around. We had a step there to see the top. He walked around with a stick, prodding everybody to get up. People were ill, they didn't care, some of them didn't get up. And so we had to assemble outside the block and be counted in the morning before we went to work. We were given a ration of bread and a mug of coffee and to work. It took us about 3/4 of an hour to arrive to the place of work. The weather there, this part of the world, is terrible. We used to march. The shoes, we had clogs, and the snow used to build up, and you know, your feet went over ever so often. And this carried on for years. 4 o'clock, we were marched home. Another 3/4 of an hour. Another counting. Many times, people were missing. We could stand there, the whole camp, outside, until the tally. Many of times, people had enough, they couldn't stand anymore. You know, our camp was wired, electrical wires. People end their life hanging on the wires. They couldn't find him. We had to stand for hours before they established that the amount is correct. And then this place, the person what was in charge over the block, and every block was one of those ruthless men, they always had to supply people for sort of jobs. We also had in the camp a Dr. Mendele. They experiment on people and most inhuman operations without any, what we can give now, gas or whatever you call it, anesthetics. And these people had to supply whoever he fancied, he could. And this went on a long time. I can't even remember the time. And I wonder what made me want to carry on. And looking back now, my guiding star, my brother, he was a strong person. He always urged me on. Maybe tomorrow, maybe something, maybe it is everything. And that's how we carried on. And it wouldn't be long if the Allied forces started advancing, and we could hear already aeroplanes going around the camps. We had some feeling that something is going on. And this place was bombed. But the Allied forces knew exactly where the people are housed, where the bread and all the kitchens are. And the place where all the proviants, all the kitchen was bombed. And I remember today, that was my best day in my life. Bread was flying everywhere. And it didn't take before long, came an order. The camp is being liquidated. How little do we know that the Allied forces are behind them already. One side, the European, the American, the British, the other side, the Russians. And came an order, excuse me, that you take your belongings again, the blankets, striped suits. Day in, we slept in them, we lived in them. The weather was freezing there. I don't know. I must tell you an incident. We were on a place where we built the factory. There were cement supplied. I had the courage to empty a bag of cement, and there used to be double papers. So I cut a hole and put it on to keep myself warm. But I paid the price once. They applaud you if you hear something, you know. I had that time a scar on my head for wearing this. Anyway, I might go too quick from one thing to another. But you mustn't forget, every time I talk, my blood curdles. But I must talk. Now we're going on about liquidation of this camp. That was the death march. It's called now. We didn't know. We were marched for day in and day out, at night on fields laying huddled together to keep warm. Bread was only supplied, thrown in. Whoever was lucky got something. I was lucky, I was little, I could get to the ground quicker. All little things would make me think now how I survived with my brother. And this went on for days. People were starving, dying on the way. We had the Gestapo all walking side. Anybody couldn't walk anymore was shot and left. And they didn't know where to take us backwards or forwards. They were already in turmoil, the German forces. They left us once in a camp, and in the morning we got up. We didn't see anybody in the towers. We didn't realize that we were liberated. So we started walking out a little bit from the camp. We were frightened. We'd never been anywhere. Is that the end? If so, what do we do now? But it didn't take long. In the morning, they appeared again and start marching us further on. In the end, we finished up in Czechoslovakia in a place called the Reisenstadt. And there was a camp, and they threw us in there. It was big gates, I remember now. Everybody was marched in there, and the gates were closed. We arrived there with hundreds of people, starving, skeletons. And we thought that's the end. You couldn't get out. And people look in heaven. You know, can you imagine the scenery? Fortunately, again, the Russians were coming within a few days. We heard tanks rumbling, and the gates were blowing open. And the people I didn't know what soldiers they were, Russians or English or so on. They were very, very kind. They started bringing doctors and food. They meant good. But the food killed hundreds of people because we haven't eaten for years. And people started indulging. And we had a great loss of people. Even my brother was taken to a place, a military hospital, which fortunately he made it. And so came the liberation. You can imagine liberation. The word liberation is such a wonderful thing. My troubles has just begun. My brother and I decided, we walked out of this camp into a house that was empty. We found civilian clothes, and we started marching. We finished up in a town, Bratislava in Czechoslovakia. The local government accepted us. They fed us for a few days, gave us shelter, and told us, you can't go anywhere yet. There's no transport, no railways, everything is bombed. It might take you days before you can make your destination wherever you want to go. So he said the best thing is we go to the station and wait. We got to the local station, people on the roof, on every bit was people hanging to get back to Europe. It took us days and days before we got travel, hitchhiking by farmers, and we got back to my hometown. My brother and I, we thought, surely it must be somebody. At this point, I didn't know about my family, what I left. 5 brothers, sisters, my mother, father, families, a whole communities, uncles. And I was told by the local Gentile people what happened to my family. You can imagine what this homecoming meant. They assembled all the people. It was not far from the hometown. Was a place called Chełmno. That wasn't a concentration camp. That was a gas chamber. They told me the story. They came. They gave the people 24 hours to get ready to take what they need, bundles. You can see what they got, their old belongings. And they took him on lorries to a place, they told them. These lorries were already fitted out with gas chambers. Before they got there, they were murdered. And that was my homecoming, the liberation. We got into the town. The local community gave us a place which belonged to Jewish people. And when we got there, my brother and I, we already found a few people came back, a few girls, a few boys, about a dozen of us living in this place. We decided, how can you stay in a place like this? And another thing, we were there for a little while. We got a letter thrown in by a group of Nazis. If we don't want you back, we got no room for you here. After coming back, that's the reception we had. Unanimously, we all decided we can't stay here, we move on. So, in a bigger town called Lodz, there were already United Nations relief centers which tried to help survivors to rehabilitate, to do things. We got there. From there, we were sent to Austria, Linz, which was hundreds of people from all over Europe, survivors, Russians, and we stayed there and teach us whatever we want to learn. And this carried on for a while. I didn't know what the end will be. I lived with my brother. And one day I walk around from the Red Cross, looking for a person from my hometown. You have got family in England which are looking for people from my family. Has anybody survived? And that is when I came here in 1947. To a family, cousins which I never met, I knew about them. I arrived from Austria by train to Victoria Station. I never met these people. They somehow, she recognized there's something about me. And I stayed with this family. They were very, very helpful. They had their own family with children. The children couldn't speak my language. I couldn't speak English. And the parents gave me a lot of attention. And the children were young. They were a bit jealous even. Why mother, father put so much effort to help me? And then I was put to a trade. They asked me, what can you do? I said, I've never done anything. I have got no education, only elementary Polish education in Hebrew, of course. They decided to put me apprentice to a tailoring, which I have done. I learned. I never forget the first wage was £3. I only got the £3 from this governor, whatever you call him them days. My cousin went up and talked to him. You got a boy, he came here to travel. At least give him some spending money to him. And I learned the hard way what is life all about. It took me a long time to adjust to the way of life, to the British way of life.